We're going to be talking about why we need to think about how outcomes are chosen in research and exactly what are these things called core outcome sets and how can these help address some difficulties in research. We're going to be covering why, how core outcome sets are developed and some of the challenges and solutions to those challenges. And really our focus here is very much on how patients are contributing to core outcome set development. Then we're going to move on towards the end to talk about what COMET is doing and how they're helping, particularly emphasis again on patients. And then along the way, we're thinking about how patient organisations have helped with core outcome set development. And really finish off handing over to you to help us think about how COMET and an organisation within COMET called Poppy, which we'll talk a bit more about, can work with patients and patient organisations to move things forward. So Heather, handing over to you now.
Hi, I'm Heather Bagley. I'm Patient and Public Involvement Coordinator with the COMET initiative. And today I'll explain what the problems with outcomes in research are, what core outcome sets are and how these can help address the problems. And I'll also explain how core outcome sets are developed. At the moment, different studies looking at the same treatments for the same condition often measure different outcomes. When such studies are completed, we cannot compare or combine their results in studies such as systematic reviews because they've used different outcomes. And the scale of this untidiness is striking. For example, over 25,000 of the outcomes in cancer trials have only been used once or twice. And over 2,000 different measurement instruments have been used across 10,000 trials in schizophrenia, equating to a new instrument being introduced for every 5th trial. Research needs to be tidied up in order to help reduce waste in research and in order to achieve the aim of research in helping practitioners and patients to improve healthcare and health. Alongside the problem of inconsistency in outcomes is the problem of selective reporting of outcomes. It's been found that studies reporting positive or significant results are more likely to be published, and outcomes that are statistically significant are more likely to be fully reported. The third problem is that currently outcomes used in research may not be relevant to patients. In deciding what outcomes are the most important, people who know what it's like to live with the effects of conditions and treatments should have a say. The people who usually know this best are patients and their families or carers. We need to be confident that the outcomes that we use are important outcomes for patients and relevant to them. So what's the solution? Well, if all studies in a particular health condition use the same outcomes, they could all be compared and combined. This would reduce waste by making best use of all the research and reduce selective reporting bias. Patient input into agreeing outcomes of importance is vital. When a set of main outcomes has been agreed for a health condition, it's called a core outcome set. A core outcome set is an agreed standardized set of outcomes that should be measured and reported as a minimum in all clinical trials in specific areas of health or healthcare. When a core outcome set has been agreed, it's hoped that researchers will use it in all studies for a particular condition or intervention, adding in other outcomes for their study if they wish. We fully expect researchers to measure other outcomes as well, but the core set is the minimum for all. So core outcomes have to be relevant not just to health professionals, but also to patients and carers. So they are all key stakeholders in core outcome set development. So some studies, some core outcome set studies use interviews to identify what outcomes are important to patients and why. Systematic reviews are used to identify which outcomes have been used in previous clinical trials for the condition. And some studies have reviewed relevant qualitative studies to identify patient important outcomes. From these activities, core outcome set researchers develop a list of outcomes which are often then used as in a consensus or Delphi survey. In these surveys, the outcomes are listed and participants are asked to rate how important a particular outcome is. They can also suggest outcomes that they think are missing. The results of this are collated, and then there's a second round of rating where people see their own scores from round 1 and the group scores of other stakeholder groups for each outcome. They're then asked to re-rate the outcomes. Some core outcome set studies have a third round of rating where the same process happens again. Many core outcome set studies end with a consensus meeting where a smaller group of the Delphi participants are brought together to discuss the outcomes.